this is potentially building to the mother of all short squeezes. And I think the fact that they keep piling on more and more naked short interest on the Comex tells us that they're losing control of this.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. I have back on the line our good friend Dave Kranzler from Investment Research Dynamics. And boy, we're going to have a dynamic conversation about all that's going on in the world, starting with Greece, then moving on to the silver open interest, which just hit an all-time high yesterday, and so much more. Dave, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. I always love chatting with you.
Well, I always love having you on, Dave, because you're a straight shooter and a good guy, and your heart's in the right place. And I got to tell you, man, it's a beautiful day out today. I don't know if you guys can hear lawnmowers in the background. I've shut the windows, but it's a beautiful day today, and all looks well, except we know behind the scenes, the criminals in our own government, literally both on the right and the left, are going to push through this TPP, which will devastate what's left of the economy, and much more because it's secret and we can't read what's in it. They're total fascist, tyrannical monsters, these people. But it's a beautiful day out, and all looks well, just like it's always beautiful in Greece. But under the cover of that beauty, the banksters will take the Greek islands, the public works, the water rights, the pensions, as they enslave Greece to more bailouts. I was reading yesterday, Dave, $100 billion is the new bailout package for Greece. These people are insane, and the only way this ends is for the people to rise up like Iceland did and say, hell no, and arrest the bankers. So, Dave, what do you make of what's going on in Greece? And then we'll move on.
Sure. Actually, just to circle back really quickly, you mentioned the TPP, which is a particular thorn in my side, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, but anyone who's read the legislation and discloses its contents to the public can be thrown in jail. That was an executive order, I think it was, signed by Obama. It's either an executive order or it's just decreed in the bill itself. But and I emailed that to a buddy of mine, and he came back and he goes, yeah, that includes members of Congress. And he said last night he was listening to an interview of Marcy Kaptur, who's a representative from Ohio. And she said she was seriously frightened by the threats to prevent disclosure. And his comment on TPP is that it's horrifying. It formalizes the loss of America's sovereignty and replaces it with slavery. The loss of sovereignty has been going on for a while, but only in a de facto sense. So this TPP is, I've been calling it the final nail in the coffin of the middle class of this country.
Yeah, it's that and more. It is total overt fascism. It is a lockdown of the economy. Jeff Sessions and Elizabeth Warren have been sounding the alarm, both of them saying that this secret trade deal, this secret Obama trade deal is literally what you just said. It's the death nail in what's left of our economy, and worse, because they can't even tell us what's really in it. They probably don't even know what's really in it. And what worries me is if you want to see the end of the alternative media, put this thing through, because within it is buried a bunch of new copyright laws and overreaching rules which allows the government, if it even suspects you have broken any copyright law, which will be new copyright laws, which will be far and overreaching, and if they suspect you've broken any copyright laws, there is power in this thing to seize your assets, seize your websites, and shut them down. Without writ of habeas corpus, without knowing what the charges are, without going into court to defend yourself, they'll just seize it and shut it down. It'll be a great way to put an end to all discourse and debate in this country, won't it?
Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't necessarily refer to it as Obama's trade bill. He's clearly the one that's championing it, and it's actually, this bill in and of itself stands completely in opposition to everything and all the principles Obama ran on in 2008, and that got him elected. And to me, what's really behind this bill is a massive amount of corporate money. I'm sure the large multinational corporations drafted it, just like Citigroup drafted the latest derivatives legislation that was passed by Congress. And it just goes to show that Obama is really nothing but a dish rag for the corporations who have bought and paid for the White House.
Right. And you're right to say it's not just an Obama bill, because look at the GOP, look at Boehner get behind this thing and pass
These
it.
guys are just hand puppets for the big corporations and wealthy individuals like Buffett and Bill Gates who control them.
Yeah, well, we find ourselves in a desperate situation now, and we, you know what, Dave? We've often said that the banksters, who essentially control the Congress and the Senate, the banksters, are going to do the same thing to this country that we see them doing to Greece. And everybody thought that was hyperbole. Oh, they would never come for our pensions. They could never take our infrastructure, our water rights, our public utilities. But that's exactly what they're going to do. And if we want to bridge back over to Greece. Look at this insane unrepayable debt. The ECB said to raise emergency Greek bank aid to near $100 billion. $100 billion, Dave. I mean, there's just no way that this thing can end in any way other than the whole of Greece being sucked up and taken in as an asset for the banksters, which I think is their goal.
This Greece thing has been a serious Six Flags roller coaster ride. I mean, I said from the get-go that if you follow the money, and you can't really follow it because the real money is buried on off balance sheet in the form of OTC derivatives, mostly credit default swaps that the banks have a huge exposure to. But I said from the get-go that the Greece and the Troika would work something out to kick the can down the road because there was financial motivation there. And then last week, it looked like they were gonna pull the plug on Greece, and I said, I publicly admitted I may be wrong. Maybe Greece leaves, but you have to question yourself through all the threats and jawboning that's been going on. There has to be a reason why the banks and the Troika are still at the negotiating table, and there has to be a reason why Greece is still at the negotiating table. I mean, why doesn't Greece just say adios and start printing up drachma? If German leaders don't want their taxpayers to subsidize Greek lifestyles, why doesn't Germany just say adios? Why is this negotiation stance still going on? And I've changed my mind again, and I think they're ultimately going to reach a deal to kick the can down the road. And again, I think it just points to following the money, or following it to the extent that you can. And again, it's unprovable because there's so much non-disclosure now, and so much the banks can get away with hiding their true balance sheet exposure to these situations. But I just know that, and this would include U.S. banks, I know that there's a massive credit default swap exposure going on at the banks, regardless of whether or not they've transferred their on-balance sheet debt exposure to the ECB, the EU, and the IMF. There's still the derivatives, and I have a feeling that's what this is mostly about.
Yeah, well, let me read you this from our friend Jeff Nielsen over at Bullion Bulls Canada. He's always got an interesting spin on these things, and he writes, the headline is, "Did Greece's government cave into terrorists?" And he writes, "The corporate media has been gleefully proclaiming victory for the past 2 days as Greece's previously defiant government has apparently agreed to concessions as the first step toward piling more debt onto this bankrupt economy. The EU has been practicing any and every form of economic terrorism at its disposal to attempt to bully Greece's government into acquiescing to more of this self-destruction. Obviously, if the Cyprus government is now embracing more of this economic suicide, it can only mean that the coercion and threats have finally worn down their resistance. Being a crime syndicate, perhaps senior government members were simply told that if they don't cooperate, that members of their families would begin to have, quote-unquote, accidents." I don't think that's too far off from the truth, because it takes a lot of courage to stand up to these people. I mean, my God, look at the list of recently deceased bankers in mysterious ways, always said to be suicide. I think it's very, very scary to be a public person and to stand up to these banksters, because you're literally standing up to the mafia. And on their list of things that they can use against you is murder. They take people out. They're capable of taking people out. And it's got to be very, very scary. And so it would be very, very scary to be in Cyprus's shoes standing up to these mafiosos, don't you think?
I completely agree. And there's no telling what kind of ammunition the NSA is given representatives of the Troika that they can use against this guy.
Yeah, well, the NSA, the NSA, that's a great point. This is an all-encompassing information network run by the globalist banksters, the NSA, the CIA. In the UK, their secret services, all aligned against humanity. Throw the Mossad in there as well. And I'm not sure how humanity at this point stands up to them. But I'll tell you this, if we bridge over to what's going on in the bond market and we bridge over to what's going on in the real world economy, there's very smart people that are taking measures to protect themselves. This news from Zero Hedge. $140 billion bond fund goes to cash as it braces for bond market collapse. This is a big deal. TCW Group, Dave, is bracing for a bond market collapse because they see the writing on the wall and they're trying to protect from a worst case scenario. Isn't it funny, man? Because typically what people want to do to protect from a worst case scenario is go into bonds. That's been what people have done for decades. But now the bond market itself is really one of the epicenters of this coming implosion.
Well, as a former bond market professional, I think 99% of the market participants, I'm not talking about 99% of the population of this country, 99% of the market participants do not understand what a serious problem the lack of liquidity in the bond market is. And what's happened is that through the process of QE here and abroad, the central banks they've basically sterilized the credit markets from all concept of risk or volatility or even liquidity. So for the last 6 years, most of the liquidity in the bond market has been provided by the Fed. And with this policy of ZIRP, pension funds themselves, they've had no choice in order to fund what they know are their liability streams going forward. They've had no choice but to take incredible degrees of risk in the bond market. And what's happened when you're going into a triple C rated bond that's yielding 4 to 5%, not only does that rate not reflect in any remotely way the credit risk that's embedded in that bond, but it doesn't have any reflection of the lack of liquidity. I mean, especially for corporate credits, investment grade or below investment grade, the rate should reflect credit risk and it should reflect liquidity risk. And there's no liquidity risk priced into this market. So what's going to happen? And everyone wants to blame it on the fact that the Wall Street dealer network has been forced to reduce their capital exposure. Well, yeah, they've been forced to reduce their capital exposure because the first time around they played the role that the Fed's been playing, and that they were making markets on bonds that they shouldn't have been making markets on, and they got stuck holding positions that the taxpayers had to pay for. So Congress said, no, you guys got to run a tighter ship. The taxpayers aren't going to bail this out again. And that's why the big Wall Street banks have pulled their liquidity away from the market. It's not only just regulatory, but it's just outright risk. And no one knows the risk better than these big investment banks because they're the ones underwriting this shit.
Yeah.
So at any rate, what's going to happen here is, and I'm actually surprised TCW was able to unload as much as it's unloaded without really affecting the market. I think they probably have been doing it. I would bet they've been doing it over the last 6 months in a very slow and methodical way. And that's just TCW, and they're not even close to being the biggest fixed income manager out there.
Right.
When we start seeing credit events and when we start seeing the market force interest rates up at the long end, which we're starting to see right now, what's going to happen is you're going to get the Fidelities and the Putnams and the Pimcos of the world and the BlackRocks of the world, and they're going to be looking for bids. And it's going to get to the point, and what happens is a buyer, especially in the bond market, isn't going to stick a bid out unless he knows he wants to own the bond. And he's going to stick out a bid that's going to price in the likelihood that A, he's going to have to buy that bond if he sticks a bid out, and B, he's willing to buy it at a rate where he's willing to hold it for quite some time, because who knows where the next level of liquidity is going to exist. And I can guarantee you we're going to see this bond market start to fall in step function, and people are just going to be horrified when they see this happen. I mean, I've personally experienced this in the bond market when I was trading junk bonds in the 90s, and I got stuck on positions that were a little bit bigger than they should have been, and the market went away.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about bonds that start dropping 10 or 20 points at a clip.
Yeah.
And then you go into a market where people will just quote the market. And we're going to start seeing that in investment grade debt as well.
Yeah.
And that's why TCW is doing what they're doing. And they probably haven't done it enough. TCW is one of the sharper fixed income management outfits out there. At least they were when I was involved in the market back in the 90s. It's the same guy running it. So I assume it's the same thing.
Well,
And I have a colleague of mine, or a former colleague, who's one of my best friends in New York, and he's got a relationship with someone who's very high up and politically and financially plugged. He's probably, I guess you'd call him one of the elitists. And he told my buddy that he's never seen so many seasoned professionals with a frightened look in their eyes when they start to talk about the bond market.
yeah, I've heard the same thing. I've heard the same thing from a source of mine who is in Thailand, and I was thinking about writing it, but all the information he was giving me was coming secondhand, so I decided not to pass that on. But it's essentially, though, exactly what you just said. These bankers are terrified, and they're telling those that are their closest confidants to buy gold. That's what I'm being told from my source in Thailand. But circling back to TCW real briefly before we move on to silver, Jerry Cudzel from TCW Group is saying that we never realize what the tipping point is until after it happens. We're as defensive as we've been since pre-crisis. Of course, he's talking about Lehman and Bear Stearns in 2008. TCW, it goes on to say, is not alone. Bond funds are holding about 8% of their assets as cash-like securities, the highest proportion since at least 1999, according to FTN Financial. The thing is, Dave, speaking of Bear Stearns, when liquidity goes away, it is a scary event. The end will come like a thief in the night, which is what we've been saying for so long. And people wonder how they're going to lose everything. People wonder how George Carlin will be right when he said, oh, they're going to take everything. They're going to take your retirement money, they're coming for your retirement money, and they're going to get it. People wonder how that'll happen. Well, when the bond market goes, it's a great way for people to lose everything if they have their retirement assets wrapped up in U.S. government bonds and treasuries. So let's move on here to silver open interest. You've been writing about this. You noted before we started the call, Dave, silver open interest hit an all-time high on Monday. What do you make of that?
Well, it's been hitting an all-time high every day in a row now for several days. The silver open interest on the Comex has been increasing just about every day to new all-time highs, and it's increasing especially in relationship to the amount of silver underlying those contracts that's available to be made for delivery. So for instance, as of yesterday's trading, the open interest in silver futures on the Comex was a little over 195,000 contracts, and that translates into around, without running the numbers exactly, it's around 975 million ounces of silver. That number in and of itself is about 20% more than the annualized run rate of silver that's produced by all mines globally.
Right, that's what I was going to say. It's more than the annual amount of physical silver that's pulled out of planet Earth.
That's right. But see, the Comex vaults were reporting a little under 58 million ounces in their registered account. The registered account is the amount of silver that's available for delivery. So you're talking about an open interest of 75 million ounces against 58 million ounces of silver that's available. You're talking about it against 181 million total ounces being held on the Comex. So
well, let me ask you. I want to speculate on something here. Do you think the game at this point is, because we know the looting is on. The looting of the Treasury is on. It's been on since 2001 when Donald Rumsfeld said on September 10th, the day before 9/11 happened, that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion in transactions. We now know the Pentagon can't account for a total of $8.5 trillion. The looting is on. So do you think the gamers, those that are doing this, they're waiting for settlements in cash? They're going to get settlements in cash plus a premium to take cash and go away. And looting's on, they'll probably get their money. Is that what's going on here? Because at what point does the Comex default? It should have defaulted by now.
well, I think the reason why it doesn't default is because every delivery period, a very, very small percentage of the long side of the open interest stands for delivery. But we're talking about, let's just say in a given delivery period, if about 2% or 3% of the longs in silver stand for delivery, you're going to have an event of default.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's written in the Comex rules that the Comex can declare an event of force majeure, and who knows what type of event they'll rig so that they can declare a force majeure, and in that case they're allowed to settle these contracts in cash, and that's what we're going to see eventually. My guess is, I mean, if you just look at yesterday's inventory report, okay, and three of the bank vaults are run by HSBC, JP Morgan, and Scotia. Those are probably the three most criminal banks in the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Goldman's a criminal bank, but they're sneaky about the way they do it. These are the three most blatantly criminal banks in the Western world. And those are your three primary banks that operate the Comex silver vaults. There's two other. There's the Delaware Depository and then Brinks, and those are mainly vaults that are held by. And there's also CNT Depository, and they're the depository that sends silver to the mint. But my guess is, if you look at the total amount of silver that's being reported in the Comex, they're saying 181 million ounces. I would be shocked if even a quarter of that silver really exists in true physical form that, and hasn't been either hypothecated or outright looted.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree.
This just, if you look at India's on track to
33%.
import by far a record amount of silver this year.
Yeah.
And if you run the numbers on China's solar program, China is using up all of the silver that it produces internally to fuel its solar panel program. China's consuming an enormous amount of silver, but they also need silver for investment purposes. And it's extremely difficult to get numbers on the amount of silver that China is importing, but I can guarantee you it's a fairly large amount. And I would suspect that a lot of that silver that's going to India and China is coming out of the SLV vault.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure these Comex vaults are either actually empty or they're empty in terms of there's either lease agreements or hypothecation agreements attached to these bars, so that ultimately, if it came down to a legal dispute, the person who had silver in the vault and had it hypothecated is not entitled to that silver.
Do you remember when the Rothschilds got out of the silver fix? I think it was probably going back to about 2004, 2006, somewhere in there.
It was actually the gold fix that they got out of.
Oh, did I say silver fix? You're right.
Yeah.
I meant the gold fix. Yeah. I've always thought that was the writing on the wall, because when the Rothschilds, who controls so much of what goes on, so many nefarious things that go on planet Earth, in the financial markets and otherwise, when they get out, it's corrupt. When they don't even want to be attached to what's going on, the writing's on the wall. And I'll tell you, you hit on an important thing here. That Steve St. Angelo article I read, 33% of the physical silver supply on planet Earth is headed to India in 2015. Last year they took down 25%. If they take down 33% of the physical silver supply this year, that only leaves 67%, Dave, to divvy up between investment demand worldwide and industrial demand worldwide in Japan, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Canada, goes on and on and on. Nobody can tell me with a straight face that there will not be a deficit of physical silver here in the next 5 years, if there isn't already.
There's one that's building, and there's been rumors coming from pretty credible sources out of London that people are thinking that there may be a shortage of silver at the refineries by this September or October.
Yeah, I don't see how there couldn't be. And as our friend Rory always likes to ask, where is it all coming from, Dave? Where's all the silver coming from? He asks that every interview, and I think it's a great question, because it's one that needs to be asked, because I'm curious too, especially when they've gutted the primary silver miners.
Well, what should be frightening people is the fact that we can't answer that question.
Yeah. I tell you, Dave, it's a crazy world, and you and I just live in it. We're not running it, but we're definitely living in crazy times. Hey, anything else you want to hit on? I know we're up against the clock. Anything else you want to touch on before we lose you?
I just wanted to circle back to this issue of the silver situation really quickly, because in my opinion, the degree to which the open interest and the naked short open interest on the Comex is ballooning higher in relationship to the amount of physical silver that's available, to me that is a very loud and clear signal that the banks are having a hard time keeping a lid on the price of silver. Because if a short squeeze develops in silver, I mean, we saw what happened in 2011 when silver ran up to $49 very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, the open interest in relationship to the amount of underlying physical wasn't even remotely close to this. India wasn't importing silver like this because they had plenty of gold that they were happy to import. I think this is potentially building to the mother of all short squeezes, and I think the fact that they keep piling on more and more naked short interest on the Comex tells us that they're losing control of this. And I don't want to put any time frame on when this thing's going to explode, but when it explodes, it's going to be a doozy.
Yeah, I agree. And let's just circle back and remind people, because all this stuff goes down the memory hole. On June 9th, you wrote, "A derivatives bomb exploded within the last 2 weeks." And a quote within your article said, "I've never seen so many sophisticated Wall Streeters this scared in my entire career." So now we come full circle because, again, people need to remember it was the sudden firing of Deutsche Bank's co-CEOs that same weekend, just a few days prior to you writing that article, in which you say the brown stuff is about to hit the fan. So we don't know what's going on behind the curtain. We really don't know. I've always said the most dramatic story in the history of the human race is what's going on in the boardrooms of J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, the Fed, the central banks. They're trying to keep this thing stitched together. And I'll tell you what, when the derivatives thing blows up and the bond market goes, that's it. That's all she wrote.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah. Scary times, my friend. It's always great to have you on just to process this stuff because it helps to articulate this stuff because so much of it just literally goes down the memory hole on a daily basis because so much is happening so quickly. It's literally impossible to keep up. Dave, thanks for joining us, and just remind people about your website and all the great stuff you have over there, will you?
All right. The name of my blog is Investment Research Dynamics at investmentresearchdynamics.com, and I try to publish some original content 2 to 3 times a day if I have time, at least once a day. And I also offer mining stock and home builder research reports on my blog. I also have one on Amazon, but it's tough. The home builder and the Amazon report are geared toward people who are looking for short sell ideas. But obviously, with this bubble in the stock market that's being blown, it's futile to try and short anything right now. But if you position yourself slowly and methodically, there's a small fortune to be made shorting this market.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Dave, thanks for your time, buddy.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Always a pleasure.
We'll get you back on as information and breaking news warrants, and we really do appreciate all you do. And guys, thank you for tuning in to sgtreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and thephaser.com. Real news 24/7. God bless. Have a great week.